This is the GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 152, entitled Women's Narrower Horizons Make Them Boring. Description. This flyer claims that women are boring to men, and that men only tolerate women's much narrower horizons if the sex is good. But the sexbots, that's sex robots, are coming, so that men will sex them instead and become less tolerant of women's narrower horizons and many other faults. The results will be that more men will walk away from women. And the flyer itself. Women's narrower horizons make them boring. A lot of you have probably heard the expression, a man can tolerate a lot from a woman, so long as the sex is good, end quote. I think there's a lot of truth to that statement, but in the next decade or two, the sexbots and the artworms, that is, artificial wombs, will be with us, so men will be getting better sex from their bots than they get from women, because the sexbots will be far prettier than most women, curvier, creamier, grippier, sexier, and wanting sex when he wants it. Once this happens, men will not see women principally as sex objects, so men will tend to ignore women sexually, which then means that the traditional tolerance that men have shown towards women due to the sex that women gave men will be tested. Without female sex to mask female faults, men will become more conscious and less tolerant towards female faults, of which there are many. One of the big faults that women have, as seen by men, is how boring women are. There's a very funny comedy routine by an American comic who talks about how boring women's conversations are on his dates. I'm ad-libbing now. It's Bill Burr, a very funny man, an American comic. His attention tends to drift off, he says, and his head starts nodding as sleep approaches until a woman's speech rises in tone, indicating a question. Now quote, "Hey, that was a question. Better say yeah." I laughed and laughed at that. It is so true. We all know that men evolved to manipulate the world, and that women evolved to manipulate men. This is not a joke, even though it might seem to be one. It is in women's DNA to parasite on men's protein that men bring back from their hunts and give it to women and their kids in exchange for female sex. That's how our species evolved. Women evolved to be the sexiest of mammals, to be, effectively, prostitutes to men. But soon, the sexbots and artworms are going to cause all that to be blown out the window, revolutionizing our culture and our deepest values. With men getting their sex mostly from their bots, the many faults of women, especially their limited horizons, their lack of interestingness as judged by men, will cause relations between the sexes to sour. I only have to look at my own case to see how my own wife's limited horizons and boringness become increasingly frustrating and more intolerable to me. My Chinese wife is a professor, so you would think that she would have a keen, lively mind. 6 years ago when I met her, she was churning out research articles, reading books, etc. She kept her mind active, but for the past few years she's been going through menopause. Her moods swing, and for a few days each month, during her PMS, premenstrual syndrome days, she becomes a bad-tempered, divorceable bitch. If she were like that all the time, no man would go near her. Right now, I'm forced to put up with these menopausal mood swings because I need her to give me a green card. Assuming I get it, then I need to make a decision. Do I want to stay with this boring woman who cares more about the price of food in the supermarket than about the world? I tell myself, wait for a while until her menopause has truly finished, her periods stop, and she calms down, with her hormones more like a man's, that is, not following a monthly cycle, so the woman can be calm and think more rationally like a man, without being a monthly slave to her hormones the way reproductive women are, especially in the PMS days before she starts bleeding. Sometimes I wonder if her boringness is just a simple matter of IQ difference. Research shows that couples with a greater than 5 IQ points difference are unlikely to survive. Couples are thus very sensitive to IQ differences. Another question I have is that perhaps it's her Chineseness that makes her so boring to me, so uninteresting. China is, after all, an intellectually sterile culture. It has no world-class intellectuals, sages as I call them, on the world stage pushing their original ideas. It has won one pathetic science Nobel Prize, and it is ultra-conservative, being the only country in the world that does not use an alphabet. It is a freak nation that way. I find it puzzling that a professor woman can pass her time watching 80 IQ soaps on her iPad every day. Is her mind switched off? Maybe, due to the menopause. Perhaps she will bounce back to her old self that I knew 6 years ago, or maybe her current state will remain her future state. I'll just have to wait and see. I read that menopausal women suffer from fatigue, both physical and mental, and they have hot flushes and mood swings, so hopefully her current state is temporary and that things will improve. I think I wrote this 2 years ago. No change. So I'm becoming increasingly cynical. If I get my green card, then probably I will go full MGTOW. If not, then I don't see myself staying with this bad-tempered, boring, limited-horizoned female. I'd rather live alone and not have to be bothered by her female moodiness and lack of interest in the world. She doesn't give a shit about who I am or what I am. She only cares about how much money I have, which is something I piss on. In the form of a masculinist slogan that I've been using lately, quote, "I'm more than a cash machine, you bitch." So probably what I'll do is nothing for a year or so, and wait to see what she becomes when her menopause finishes. If she becomes calm and her brain switches on again, then I will see her less negatively and might decide to stay with her to get a bit of company that I would not get if I go totally MGTOW. My father has been MGTOW for 3 decades, and he seems quite happy. I asked him decades ago when he was visiting me in Japan, where I was living at the time, quote, "Dad, do you prefer living alone?" He replied that once his libido dried up by the time he was 70, he had no need for women sexually, so in effect, he had no need for women, period. He had a very bad experience with my mother, who was a real bitch, ambitious, hypergamous. Hypergamy means that's the tendency of women to want to mate with a woman who has, with a man who has higher socio-economic status than she has. In other words, she would get superior genes for her kid. And that makes good Darwinian evolutionary sense. My father, where am I? I've lost track. Who was a real bitch, ambitious, hypergamous, and not very bright. My father came from a divorced family and simply latched on to the first woman who wiggled her twat at him. It was a match made in hell. She was not bright enough for him and felt mentally pressured by him, by me and my younger sister, who were all a lot brighter than she was. Only my brother was near her level, and his life record shows it. He was a gutsy, ambitious entrepreneur who went bankrupt 3 times in his life. He had the guts to start businesses and was quite wealthy at times, but did not have the sustained ability to make it long term. Only my doctor's sister is truly financially very well off, worth about 5 million, like my father, who knows how to invest. So my father has chosen to be MGTOW for the past 30 years, since the death of his wife, my mother. I may go the same way. Why put up with female intellectual horizons, or the lack of them? Intellectually, I don't take women seriously. The female contribution to world intellect is negligible, a mere 1% or so. Women have won 1% of the Science Nobel Prizes and none of the top math prizes, Fields Medal, a Bell Prize. When I look at a physics book and I discover it's written by a woman, which rarely happens, I'm instinctively disappointed because I know the odds are high it will be only of mediocre standard because of the simple fact that the genii are males. As for math books written by women, they are far fewer. I have maybe 1,000 math books, and I think only one of them is written by a woman. If I decide to go MGTOW for the rest of my life, I will plunge into my work, which is being a global educator, studying PhD level pure math and math physics, and then making YouTube lecture courses in these topics for the world for free, which I believe is something pioneering and significant. I get intellectual orgasms from mastering and clicking a difficult concept or proof. So doing this for a few more decades, if I can live that long, will be quite fulfilling. I've read that about 40% of women in the US over 40 live alone. So that probably means about as many men also live alone. That does not surprise me too much. When women lose their sexual attractiveness, as the MGTOW say, hit the wall, men lose interest in them sexually. And given women's faults, their nagging, their fatness, their bad temper, their boringness, their limited horizons, their parasitism, men often choose to have nothing to do with them. So these second harbour women rot on the shelf, living alone and not very happy. Many second harbour, that is older than 40 years old, men choose to live alone. Fourth quarter men, that's older than 65, have dried up libidos, so probably a higher proportion of them are less prepared to put up with women's faults than first harbour men, that is less than 40 years old, and prefer to live alone, like my father, and for similar reasons. I may go the same way. I would like to have a relationship with a woman who was a sage, that's intellectual, who is interested in ideas and appreciates me for loving ideas. But my current Chinese wife hasn't a clue. She sees me only as a cash machine who does not dispense much cash, so fuck her. Or rather, someone else can fuck her. Or better still, and most probably given her age and her fatness, no man will fuck her, and she will live alone for the remaining 30 years of her life. It's frustrating living with someone who is blind to what one values most highly, in my case, ideas. I divorced my first wife because she wanted to live in Australia, which would have been a living death for me, given the country's sport-oriented anti-intellectualism. If my current wife stays as non-intellectual as she is currently, which hopefully is just a temporary menopausal problem that will disappear in a year or two, but it didn't. This is 2 years after I wrote this flyer. Then I may just walk away with green card, ! And live the life of an intellectual monk. I'll soon be 70 and, like my father, not care about women sexually. So since women nag and don't have an idea in their pretty, if young, little, definitely little, heads, then let some young men, in brackets, fuck them. I'm out of here. I may go MGTOW for the next 20, 30 years of my life, if I can live that long. My father's 97, now he's 98, and may get to 100. Playing with ideas, the love of my life, is far better being a MGTOW, doing what one loves, than being a manslave to some bloody fluffy. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channel name De Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers. Ciao.